All right, welcome to the next video in my chess series, Chess for Aspen. And this game was played by a young friend of mine, um, also a beginner in chess, so I think it fits into kind of the theme of this series to basically help beginner chess players like my son. And and what I want to do with this particular game is focus on, we're going to touch on opening principles a little bit, but we're also going to start going into kind of a systematic approach um, to analyze a chess position, the moves that are being made, the territory that's out there, um, questions that you can ask, not only on your opponent's moves, but also on your own, to kind of either formulate plans for yourself. Some questions just end up in making mental notes. Some moves with those notes as they accrue, just plans will just kind of present themselves because chess honestly has kind of a life of its own, and we don't want to try and impose our will on the chessboard all the time. Sometimes we have to conform to the game that's being played. Play the board. Play the game that's in front of you instead of trying to impose your will. Okay, so we'll just start out right away. So this game starts with e4. Don't want to go too much into openings. Other videos I'll upload later will explain the moves that I make here. But knight c6 is played, knight f3, and f5. This goes into one of my favorite openings for black, and it's called the Colorado Gambit. Feel free to look up some videos on this particular opening. But the reason why I like it is because in many lines, black ends up with more central control than white does out of the opening, which is kind of rare for black, being the second player, right? A lot of times white would capture this pawn. That's not what happens in this game. D3 is played, which is fine, which is a fine move. But now we have the option. We can capture this pawn, or we can follow basic chess principles, right? I don't want to keep moving the same piece twice in the opening. So that's why we're just going to continue with a central thrust with e5. And then here, white decides to take the f5 pawn for me, which leads to d5. And this is what I'm talking about. The black now controls a little bit more space in the center. And now this move also opens up the bishop's attack on that pawn on f5. So we're going to get that back. So although this is a gambit where we initially sacrifice one pawn in material, we're going to get this f pawn back. And there's no good way for white to hang on to this. So it kind of along the lines of like Queen's Gambit type stuff. And you can feel free to look up videos there. It is a gambit. You're giving up material, but your opponent usually isn't successful in hanging on to it. So you're going to get it back, all right? And here, white makes what I think is kind of the first tactical error, if you will, because we're starting to violate some opening principles. One of them is don't move your queen out too early, right? In the opening of a chess game, you've got to get your forces out onto the battlefield, if you will. They're not going to do you any good sitting on the back rank, right? And this move does come with a threat. We now have two pieces attacking the e5 pawn, which I will have to respond to. But note, it also blocks in the light squared bishop, which means that white is another move away from being able to castle, which is part of our development stage. So this move, while it does come with a threat, does more harm than it does good, in my opinion. But like I said, I do have to react to this threat, and I do that by developing another piece, which bishop d6 now solves the threat on the e5 pawn. So no problems there. White then plays knight f to d2. So here, again, one of the opening principles is to not move the same piece twice in the opening. I mean, there are sometimes very good reasons to do this, but I would say before like move 10, there shouldn't be any reason why you're moving the same piece twice in the opening. So this is another violation of kind of basic chess opening principles. It also blocks in the dark square bishop and takes away a square that the other knight might enjoy to develop to, right? So white is kind of restricting himself, right? So that's, and there's no real strategic or tactical benefit to this move as far as where the knight can go next. These squares are all kind of they're contested at the very least, right? So we're going to continue our plan. We're going to get our pieces to bear. Just so happens that the bishop here has a nice recapture, so let's do that. Bishop takes f5. And then white moves queen h5 check. So here, once again, white only has two pieces developed, and now the queen has moved again. So we're violating that opening principle with a check that's relatively easy to parry, right? So bishop g6 is a great way to stop this check because it forces white to move the queen yet again. And this is why you'll hear one of the opening principles is also don't move your queen out early. Well, this is why. So white now has to move the queen again. And this is just kind of losing time, right? So now black, I have three minor pieces developed. White has two pieces out on the battlefield, if you will, and both of them have moved multiple times, which has given me a lead in development. Okay, but here's where I kind of want to get into, and this is just kind of a beginning stage of the real topic of this video, and that is this consistent analysis of the moves that have been made, the spaces that are in control, and how we can decide on moves to make, right? So the first question I want you to ask yourself whenever an opponent makes a move is take a look at what space this piece now just moved, right? It now controls spaces or exerts, maybe not control, but exerts pressure over spaces that it didn't before, right? And that's all these squares here, right? And then what you can do is kind of, well, we can take away the contested ones, like the queen to here. None of these squares would be beneficial. My queen and rook and other pieces. The e6 square, I don't have any control over, so we'll leave that. This one's controlled by the bishop. Pawn, bishop controls that. So here, this is what we're left with, right? This is now the new space that white controls, right? And when you see that, you can see this e6 square seems to be a bit of a problem because, well, queen to e6 would be a check, and it forks the undefended pawn sitting here on d5. So we want to do something about that, but we wouldn't have seen that if we didn't ask where could this piece go next. So that's kind of the first question. What space? What's the space that lies ahead of this piece, right? So we know there's an idea here, or kind of a threat of queen to e6 check, right? Just a note to solve that. It's not a super threat. Again, this is just an easy example because I can, if the queen moves to e6 check, I can block it with the knight. So knight to e7 would solve both problems, blocking the check and defending the pawn on d5. However, I would be then reacting to white's move rather than playing the moves that I want to play, right? So noting that this threat even exists, I mean, knight f6 would be the move that I would have played anyway, but again, this is just an example that you don't want to let your opponent dictate your moves. You want to see what the threats are, react to them, continue your plan, whatever it may be, in a way that solves those problems that might be on the board, okay? So knight f6 is played here, and then c4, okay. So this leads to what I want you to write this down if you have to. So we've already covered the space that lies ahead. Now the second question is kind of its opposite. What space did that piece leave behind? Every single piece that moves will gain new territory and lose other, okay? So c4, I mean, as far as what it can do next, obviously it can take this pawn or advance. neither one of which is a huge threat because that pawn is defended and this square is controlled by me. So we can skip to the next question, which is what did that piece leave behind? The pawn was sitting here on c2 that was defending the pawn on d3, right? And again, this doesn't mean that d3 is the target or whatever. We're just noting now where before this pawn had 3 pieces defending it, it now has only 2. The bishop and the queen are defending this pawn, and that's it. So there's a slight weakness of the pawn on d3, right? Now we then turn to the next question would be, did that piece move out of the way of any piece? Meaning, if there was, if the queen was here, for instance, this move would have allowed the queen to come out along this, so it would have gained, the queen would have gained some space, right? That's not the case here. And then the next question is, did it block any pieces? That's also not the case here. And then with those 4 questions asked, you can maybe get an idea of what your opponent's plan is. Here, I think it's the idea that white is trying to do is undermine the center, which is fine. Okay, so going along with the lead in development that we have, and white is really lagging in development. Now we can try to decide on what we want to do, right? So black has some options. We can capture here, which would lead to either knight captures or pawn captures. And here's why I don't want to do it, because if pawn captures and the knight captures, then the dark squared bishop would be a little bit freer, right? So I don't want to do that. So we can just kind of rule that out. But noting, and remember a few moves ago, we were saying how this knight was already restricted, only had a couple squares, right? This knight is in its way. There's only 2 squares for this knight to develop to. And then all of a sudden, maybe the move d4 makes all the sense in the world, right? Because we're controlling the c3 square for this knight. So now white's going to have even more difficulty developing this knight. So that's how we decided on d4, okay? All right, so white continues with bishop e2. I think the plan is pretty straightforward. White just wants to castle here. So good that this piece is coming out, but we're still going to ask the question about, the space that it now exerts effort. What space lies ahead of it? No threats there that I can see. All right, great. Space that lies behind, not something that's particularly strong. It was defending the g2 pawn, but the queen is already defending that. So again, just noting that this piece has one less defender. Nothing there, and besides, we still need to finish our own development, so we'll follow our plan and just castle. All right, and so black castles and white castles also. So here we start to enter into the middle game, right? We're developed for the most part. I do have to find a place for my queen, but we're basically developed, and we're to the point where we need to start to come up with some plans. Now, earlier we noted that the d3 pawn was a little bit weaker than it was before, and this also means, well, we have to ask ourselves, it's defended twice right now. Is there a way to build up on this piece, right? So moves like knight to b4 come to mind. Maybe e4 could be a good plan. In fact, I think that might be a plan already in this game, because black already exerts a lot of pressure on the e4 square, right? Chess isn't all just about pieces, it's also about territory, right? So pawn to e4, if takes, now I'd have the E and F files would be wide open, right? With those pawns gone. Okay, so that could be an idea, but I don't think we're ready for that yet. What I want to do actually is if that's the plan, to attack through the center, that'd be great. Then a rook should be here, say on e8. So we have rooks that would be on what will soon be 2 open files. So that's a plan, right? But then I also we were looking at knight to b4. Now, if we ask ourselves the same questions of our own moves, right? What is the space that lies ahead? Okay, so after knight b4, the knight sitting here, obviously the space that lies ahead is a couple of different squares. And we realize that, wow, the c2 square is really kind of a juicy space for a knight because it'll be attacking a rook that is currently trapped in the corner. So we have two choices. We can attack in the center, which we already said we're not quite ready for, or let's do this because we're going to exert a pretty good threat on this rook. So let's say that you are here, and now let's make that move, and now you're white. What would white do to try and stop knight to c2? Well, the only thing that white has currently as a resource would be to bring the bishop back to d1. So that's this. But then you ask, again, the space that lies ahead would be, it's defending that c2 square, but it would be leaving behind the d3 pawn. So suddenly, the queen would be the only piece defending it, and it would, with the knight here anyway, would be an attack twice. So this is a way my plan suddenly just, poof, right there. There it is. We can win a pawn. That's the plan. Knight to b4 is the move because we're expecting bishop to d1 to save the rook, and then we'll just take this pawn. However, white doesn't see the threat, I guess, here, and plays b3. So the plan here then just instantly changes. Knight c2 is kind of just a no-brainer, right? We're gonna eat up that rook in the corner. White plays bishop b2, which is a good move, in that it's defending the rook that was currently undefended. So by all means, I mean, this rook's a goner, but don't let me take it for free. So this is fine. Space that lies behind, though, this diagonal is a little bit weaker than it was before. So even if this knight were to move, white doesn't have any control here. Again, not something that is like an immediate plan or whatever. Space that lies ahead. Okay, the bishop now exerts kind of a pressure along this diagonal. And here we start to say, well, wait a minute. Okay, we had a plan of moving e4, right? And when I ask myself about the space I'm leaving behind, that would include the d4 pawn, which now has a little bit more pressure on it. So this is why here, I mean, the knight is currently defending it, but this knight's not sticking around for very long. It's going to take this rook. So this pawn needs some assistance, to be honest with you. And along with the idea of keeping white restricted, since white has given me such a lead in development, this is how the move c5 comes to my mind, right? It's defending and reinforcing the pawn on d4, and it's keeping that pawn on d4 because I want white's dark squared bishop to have very little mobility. All right. Here, white plays bishop d1. Pretty straightforward threat. It's attacking the undefended knight here. But what was the space that lies behind? Well, now we just note that the pawn on d3 now only has one defender, and that's the queen. Okay, well, here we can start to think about, is there a way to get the queen to move, remove the defender? It's the last defender of this piece. Is there a way to do that? I don't see anything immediately on this position. Besides, we do have to react to our knight being under attack. So again, simple decision. Knight takes a1, and then white recaptured the knight in the corner. Okay, so now this portion of that attack is over. We're up in exchange, a knight for a rook, and now we need to turn our attention back to our plans of pushing through the center, right? And here, what I wanted to do was find a place for my queen that would help with this plan, immediately or eventually, kind of thing. So initially, maybe moves like queen e7 come to mind, but I think queen e7 might prompt white to bring the rook out, and it never makes me feel very comfortable when my opponent's rook is lined up with my queen. So we need to ask ourselves, if e4 is the plan, how do we, where can we put the queen that would eventually build up pressure on e4? Well, there's this diagonal, so what about c6? Okay, well then queen, we didn't want to go this way because of the rook, so what if we go this way? And there's actually other benefits to this move, and that it lines up the queen and the bishop, which would put some pressure on this h-pawn, and also get us one move closer to help get the queen into the attack on the e4 square. Okay, so that's how these plans just come to mind. Or and here white plays knight a3. Space that lies ahead, right? The threat here is knight to b5, which would be a fork on the queen and bishop. I'd have to move my queen, knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, might all come into play. And I don't really want to deal with that because it's going to make my queen move again. I don't necessarily want to get rid of this bishop because of the pressure along this diagonal. So here, and again, with the lack of development on White's side, we want to try and keep things restrictive. How do we prevent knight to b5? Well, how about a6? So that's how this move comes, we're trying to be restrictive. We want this knight to hang out on the edge of the board because that's just not a really, that knight is not, it's just not happy, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of places to go. Knights on the edge of the board are just not happy. Okay, and then here white plays knight f3, all right? Space that lies ahead, all right? The g5 squares now come into white's control. We have to think that knight to g5 also would then start to pressure the h-pawn that the queen's looking at, but not a big deal, right? I got a bishop, a knight, and a king defending that h-pawn, so that's fine. So that's the space that lies ahead. Space lies behind. Let's see, that knight was defending this pawn, and was defending some territory in the e4 square. And oh, well, wait a minute, that was part of our plan anyway, right? e4. And while we were talking about building up pressure here, rook and queen to build up f4, well, white has just kind of given up a little bit of territory there. And then we need to ask those other two questions, right? Did the piece get out of the way of something? No. And then did that piece block other territory? And that's where we realized that the knight now has cut off the defense of the queen, the only piece that was defending the d3 pawn. All right. And this is what the point of this video was to get you to systematically answer or ask and answer these questions, because it then moves like bishop takes d3 become very obvious, right? All right, so white plays rook e1, which is kind of forced because the rook was being attacked by the bishop. And, rooks belong on these open files anyway, but without the knight here anymore, the force that white is exerting over the e4 square is just not enough, right? My bishop, my knight, I don't necessarily need the rook and queen to come into play because the knight moved. So this is, and now e4 comes with an attack. So e4 is played here, just expanding in the center. White plays queen e6 check here. And this move makes sense to me in some respects. I do happen to think that the queen here is a little bit overextended. She's kind of alone and unafraid here with very little backup, a little bit far away from forces that might assist her. But I do understand the idea that that maybe there's some counter on the e file, and it does force my king into the corner. King h8 is the only move here, so that's what's played. And then white then decides, has to save the knight on d2 is being attacked, so knight to d2. And here you can see maybe this was the point. You're never going to be able to read your opponent's mind, but now there's three pieces attacking the e pawn. And here, since now the knight and the e file here is obviously becoming contested, we can go back to our original plan of bringing the rook into the game, right? Rook e8. And now white's queen has to move again. And that's what happens, queen h3. And here I want to get into kind of the secondary topic, right? We're asking those questions all the time, whether it's your move or your opponent's move. Always pay attention to the space that you want to gain or your opponent has gained. Pay attention to the pieces they might have left behind. And it's the same for you before you decide on your own moves. Look at what your moves are leaving behind, if anything. Because that's important, because if you're playing someone that has the same kind of systematic approach, you might miss something that you're gonna kind of hand them some advantage, and that's what you want to try to avoid here. But we're to the point where none of these questions yielded any kind of useful information, right? The space that lies ahead, kind of the same. The queen just went back to the square that she was at. Space that lies behind. The queen gave up some territory here. That doesn't yield a plan. The queen didn't get out of the way of anything, and it's not blocking anything. And so what I want you to do is kind of take a chess analysis approach of just kind of, we'll start with undefended pieces. What if we just read this chess position as like a book from top to bottom, left to right, okay? So what I want you to do is just look at a piece, say this rook, right? This rook is currently undefended. It has no defense from any other piece. So we'll call that an undefended piece. The bishop here is sitting here. It is defended by the rook. This bishop in the corner, undefended, right? This pawn is defended. This pawn is defended. This pawn is defended, but we do have to note that it's only defended by the king. And that's important because call it an under-defended piece, right? Just to make note, the knight sitting here on d2 is undefended. This pawn is undefended. This knight is undefended. White's pieces are just not really coordinating very well, right? It's not very often. I mean, this is just kind of a beginner folly, if you will. But what I want you to do is kind of look at, what if we were to combine some of these ideas? Do I want to try to attack this undefended knight? Not so much. First off, it's not going to be easy to do. Second off, I like the knight sitting there in the corner on the edge of the board. If I were to attack it, say with the queen move or something, it's just going to move to somewhere that's more useful, like here, right? I don't want to prompt that to happen. Same thing with the bishop in the corner. It only enjoys 2 squares of mobility right now. There's no reason, and plus no direct way to attack it immediately, So simple moves, like I get, these 2 pieces were undefended. Queen here makes the knight move, and we win a pawn. But there's a lot better when, evaluating all the other undefended pieces or underdeveloped pieces. And that's what I want you to focus on, is the underdeveloped piece that's directly connected to some of White's undefended pieces, right? And now, right now you can see, we already had this plan, again, of the E and F, open E and F files. But because of what's happened with this game so far, this pressure here, along with the analysis we just made, yields a question. Is there a way to maybe build up the threat on the underdeveloped F2 pawn? Do we have a piece that can do that? A move right now that will directly affect pressure along this file? You bet. Queen F7. Okay, so that's how this move is decided on. But please believe me, I don't make this move without also analyzing the space that was left behind, right? I know that I'm leaving behind the bishop. So before you make a move like this, even though the threat seems overwhelming, right, you've got to take a look at the pieces you're leaving behind. In this case, is the bishop on d6. Is there a way? Am I about to lose this bishop or something? Is there some way White can take advantage of this? Right now, no. So, call it pros and cons. There's nothing but pros for this move, right? So the queen, and please, when you're trying to think about, when you're asking those questions about the space that lies ahead, don't just limit it based on the pieces that might currently be in the way. This is a direct threat on the F pawn. All I have to do is move the knight, right? Here, White plays bishop c2, and I don't think that being down material and also underdeveloped, white shouldn't be trying to trade pieces here. We'll probably do a video here in the future about when to trade pieces and when not to trade pieces. But generally speaking, when you're down material, it's not a good time to try to trade off pieces. However, it's also not in your best interest to trade off pieces when you're the one that has the advantage, or if you're on the attack, trading pieces is gonna weaken that attack. All right. So I'm almost immediately ruling out trying to take this bishop. Plus, white hasn't seen this threat on the f pawn. So we're going to continue with this plan. I mean, if I just move the knight somewhere, probably knight to g4 was an option. Knight to d7 is the one I picked. And I can't honestly tell you why. I don't remember why I picked one or the other. Looking back now, probably knight to g4 might have been even better, considering that white's bishop just left this diagonal. The queen might take it, which leads to the same type of problem, right? The fork here, which leads to mate. But it doesn't really matter. Here, after knight d7, white takes it. And here, this is just a blunder. I mean, you've given away the queen here. Queen takes is the obvious, is an option here. But here, the attack is just, so it's overwhelming. We don't need to take the queen because queen takes f2, king h1, queen takes rook, check. The only way to stop this is to block with the knight, and then it's basically dealer's choice here. Queen or rook takes. I played queen takes f1, and that's checkmate. All right. So again, the intent of this was to, again, we're kind of touching on those opening principles, but I want you to think about that systematic approach I'm talking about. Ask those questions. There's, whenever someone makes a move, they're making that move for a reason. They want that piece to control new territory. And just by the very aspect of moving, I mean, if you move, you're controlling new space and you've given up other space, right? So take all those into account. Watch out for pieces that are moving to allow others out and or pieces that are blocking. And we saw examples of those, especially when it came down to that pawn on d3, which might have gone unnoticed had we not made mental notes, move by move, mental notes along the game. None of these things are, you're not going to be able to forecast with 100% accuracy what's going to happen in a chess game. But making little mental notes along the way of slight weaknesses here, territory pressures either gained or alleviated in other areas, these are just mental notes, and I promise you, your chess game is just going to be better because these notes that are just kind of kept in the back of your mind are going to benefit you when you're trying to come up with a plan of attack, and that's what you see here in this game. So again, this game is kind of geared towards beginners, like my friend here and my son. But by all means, I'm sure there was better moves in this game. Feel free to comment about other again, the idea being systematic approaches to chess and chess analysis, right? Undefended pieces, underdefended pieces, analyzing chess positions. So I look forward to any comments that might be coming forward, and I'm always interested in making myself a better chess player and the people that might be watching this video. So feel free to comment. If you like the video, please hit a like. I really appreciate the support any support that I can get from my audience. Although I'm very new to this stuff, I really want to make something out of this eventually. So please, if you like the video or this series, hit that like. Go back and watch the other videos, and hopefully you'll learn something, and we can all become better chess players together. And with that, thanks for stopping by, and until next time, you guys have a great day.